reading from Speaking to Reform, the Singing Revolution. Andrew? The Singing Revolution.
Revolutions come in all shapes and sizes, and most of the time when there's a revolution, there's a lot of violence, death, people are injured, and generally they're a pretty ugly situation. But tonight I'm going to talk to you about a singing revolution. Now this comes from Muvana Izama. What I've just said is my grandfather's country. However, my grandfather didn't know anything about this because he lives in Australia and he told us nothing about his country, Estonia. Now we didn't know why he didn't tell us. It wasn't until he died that we realised why he didn't tell us, when a relative came over from America and told us that as a 12-year-old, my grandfather was sent out into the forest with an axe to defend the country against the Germans. Now Estonia has this really horrid invasion type history. They're taken over by everybody in the area. The Swedes, the Danes, the Germans, the Russians, the Germans, the Russians, the Germans, the Russians, pretty much continuously. And it wasn't until 1917 that they were actually able to claim independence. Actually 1918, 24th of February, so it was 99 years the other day, of their so-called independence. But as we know, the Russians came back in and the Soviets took over again, but not before they had a lot of German, Russian kind of fighting on their land, and of course the people didn't know which side they were going to support because both sides were pretty ugly solutions for them. So when the Russians, the Soviets took over again, they enforced pretty harsh law. And in one evening, in one night, 10,000 Estonians were deported to Siberia. People were taken off the streets. They were shot or they were sent to Siberia. And this continually happened. The island where my grandfather came from, Saaremaa, was an island of 40,000 people. In a short matter of time, the population decreased to 20,000. And during this time, Saaremaa actually got completely closed off. So Estonia was closed off to the world. Saaremaa was even closed off to Estonians because it was such a strategic place. And so the Russians moved in. As you know what they did, they moved in there, the Russian people, so that they could, neutralise the culture. But there was one thing that they couldn't neutralise in Estonia, and that was the singing. The Estonians had a great culture of singing. In 1869, they started a singing festival, which is held every 5 years, and still to this day is every 5 years. And the Russians actually allowed them, I should say the Soviets allowed them to continue having their festival, as long as they sung in Russian and sung the Russian songs. Well, the first one that came along, it came to the very last song, and somehow they'd let it slip past. And the conductor got up there and started the song, Mu Isama on Minu Arm. My fatherland I love is my love. So this is a traditional song. It was a traditional poem which they put music for the 1869 festival. So the next festival came along and the Soviets said, no, can't have any of that, none of that. The Estonians came along, sang for 2 days in Russian, got to the end of the festival. They weren't having any of this. We were singing our song. So 20,000 people, mind you, they have 20,000 people on the stage, so it's a massive festival. They just all started singing this song. They didn't wait for a conductor or anything. So the Soviets tell them that the band to start playing this music, a different song. No, you can't drown out 20,000 people singing a song. So they had to allow it to happen. So they hung on to their tradition through the singing. And as time went by, when Mikhail Gorbachev came in, he allowed a bit more freedom of speech. And so then the Estonians thought, well, this is an opportunity. We can start to speak a little bit more about, create a bit of an uproar. It was very much, let's do things within the letter of the law. So they would get up and they would have these, like a demonstration, but they would talk about their culture. And then they would sing some songs. At one of these events, this was going on for a while. One of these events, people started turning up and they decided they were going to have a song, a concert in the streets of Tallinn. And they had it one night. People were singing. The next night, third night, 100,000 people in the streets singing. Now, Estonia has a population of 1 million people. So at 100,000 people, that's a big turnout. As the Soviet things started to hold down for and people were looking at options, and they came to a point where the Estonians kind of, within the letter of the law, were pushing the boundaries, and they claimed their own government. And they actually made it illegal for the Soviet flag to be raised, and made Estonia back to their national language. Now the Russians who lived there didn't like this. It was about 40% Russians living in Estonia. They were afraid that they were going to lose their way of life. So they stormed the Estonian Parliament House. And this was getting quite agitated, quite violent, and they were pushing the gates, and they got through into the courtyards. Now what happened? So once they got into the courtyard, their idea was that they were going to storm the parliament and take over. However, what happened was that it got on the radio that the Russians had stormed their parliament house. So everyone gets up and off they go and surround the parliament house. Thousands and thousands of Estonians surrounding Parliament House, and they're yelling, "Vabandus, vabandus, vabandus!" Freedom, freedom, crying out for freedom. Do you imagine the tension in the air? There's Russians inside, and they're surrounded. I'd be pretty scared if I was the Russians. And they're yelling out, "Freedom, freedom!" And this is a bit of a scary moment, because when you have thousands of people there in this kind of energy, what do you expect? You expect some kind of violence to break out. No, this is Estonia. So what happened was they parted way at the gate and allowed the Russians to file out. It's a very thin line, but you can imagine it to be pretty intimidating. And while the Russians are filing out, they're there singing, holding hands, singing Ma'uzamu, singing all their cultural songs, singing for their freedom. Estonia's, the people, they didn't have guns or weapons to fight the might of the Soviets. All they had was their culture and their singing. And you may have heard of the Baltic chain, where 1 million people held hands from the coast of Estonia right through Latvia and Lithuania. So 1 million people did that. And I could go and tell you lot more, but basically the Estonians held ground. They didn't cross the line of that violence, and they were able to reclaim their independence without loss of one life, without it turning bloody. And there is always a way of having a peaceful revolution, and I think this is a beautiful example of one. And finish with a quote from Gandhi, who said, "At first they ignore you, then they laugh at you, then they fight you, then you win. And the Estonians won.